everyone, my name is Jade and I'm a third-year PhD sociology student, and this video is about whether or not Ashton Kutcher is a feminist. So I've noticed a lot of feminist groups and organizations will post stuff on social media whereby they celebrate Ashton Kutcher for his anti-human trafficking activism. So the first time I saw one of these posts, I immediately felt uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not pro-human or child trafficking because I'm not a monster. But I'm not exactly pro-Ashton Kutcher or anti-human trafficking organizing either. For one, as an Indian woman, when I see people celebrating Ashton Kutcher for his feminism, my first thought is, hey, remember this?
I'm Raj, I'm a Bollywood producer. I like Snooki.
If you don't remember this commercial, that doesn't surprise me because no one really ever talks about it. While it is true that people can unlearn racism and then go on to engage in meaningful social activism, it's still problematic that Ashton Kutcher is celebrated for his feminism while not being called out for his racism. It promotes the idea that racism isn't a feminist issue, thereby obscuring the struggles of women and trans people of color within the feminist movement. This is only magnified by the fact that the kind of anti-human trafficking that Kutcher engages in is historically linked to racist and colonial practices. While human and child trafficking are social issues, most of the women presumed to be victims of such trafficking are actually migrant sex workers. Unlike human trafficking victims, sex workers are laborers, people who choose to engage in the selling of sexual services in order to make money. And yeah, these choices are constrained by larger social forces like racism and sexism. But choosing to work under conditions that are less than perfect is not the same as being trafficked. Not to mention most labor sects under modern capitalism are similarly imperfect. Nobody wants to be a service worker any more than they want to be a sex worker. But the former is more likely to be viewed as a choice when compared to the latter. This is because sex work, especially migrant sex work, is typically framed through imperialistic discourse. Migrant sex workers are mostly racialized and low-income women, who are always already assumed to have no agency, as they are infantilized within and by the mainstream. This is especially true for Asian women who are frequently posed as the victims of human trafficking. In turn, migrant sex workers are reposed as victims opposed to laborers, and subsequently talked over by white saviors who presume to know their interests. In fact, there's a long tradition of anti-sex work feminists using stereotypes of enslaved migrant sex workers as a mechanism to dismiss the voices of those who actually lead the movement. This kind of attitude is then taken up by government organizations, businesses, and nonprofits in the West in order to justify the national and transnational displacement, regulation, deportation, criminalization, and legalization of migrants and sex workers. An attitude exemplified time and time again throughout Ashton Kutcher's famous speech on human trafficking before Congress.
I've seen video content of a child that's the same age as mine being raped by an American man that was a sex tourist in Cambodia. And this child was so conditioned by her environment that she thought she was engaging in play. Now, when the Department of Homeland Security called us and asked if we had a tool, I had to say no. It devastated me. For the next 3 months, I had to go to sleep every night and think about that little girl that was still being abused. And the fact that if I built the right thing, we could save her.
Coupled with the highly nationalistic sentiments expressed at the beginning of his speech,
I pledge my allegiance to that flag, this nation that I love. The right to pursue happiness. It's bestowed upon all of us by our Constitution.
It's clear that regardless of his actual activist work, Kutcher is engendering a discourse aimed not at liberating the victims of human trafficking especially, or women more generally, but at reproducing the interests of state formations within wealthy Western countries. As phrased by a group of queer of color sex worker activists in Toronto, central to these interests is the control over the movement of migrants from the global south to the north. The elite in wealthy northern countries use political and economic force to extract resources from the south, then militarize the borders to retain control over these resources. This also ensures the availability of an impoverished pool of highly exploitable, disposable temporary workers. Anti-human trafficking is a way to control the movement and labor of migrant women in particular. Some anti-traffickers are genuinely well-meaning, but they are being used in the larger project of controlling and exploiting migrants and sex workers. In short, anti-trafficking language is often used to guise anti-sex worker and colonialistic rhetoric that functions to the disadvantage of oppressed groups. The thing is, it's not sex work that makes either sex workers or traffic victims vulnerable to subjugation and violence. On the contrary, the vulnerability of these groups is created as a result of the criminalization of both migration and sex work, as well as the systems of Western imperialism from which such criminalization is located and draws strength. So that's my video on Ashton Kutcher and anti-human trafficking activism. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see similar videos, please subscribe to my channel. See you later!